name's Paul Tilstone from Festive Road, and today I am in conversation with Fergus from Fidelity International about the era of purposeful travel. Carol, welcome.
Hello, Paul. How are you? And thank you for inviting me to be part of this session.
I am very well. This isn't about me. This is about you and about Fidelity, but thank you for asking. Are you back at no, you're at home, aren't you? I can tell by the picture behind you.
Yes, I'm at home, have been home for over a year now. We are thinking about moving people back to the office, but at the moment I'm still working from home.
Great. Let's start with, give us a kind of landscape picture. Tell us about either your program circumstances or your company circumstances, something that tells us kind of what's going on in the big picture with the travel program and Fidelity International.
So, well, for the last year, we've actually done, like most companies, very little travel. But as a travel department, we've used taken the opportunity to look at our world and say, okay, what can we do? What can we make better? And how can we make ourselves really strong so that when we go back to travel after COVID, we are actually ready? Fidelity as a company, we are very, very sort of have a very large awareness about who's travelling, when they're travelling, how they're travelling. There's a relatively robust approval process in place. So everyone that needs to travel has to be business critical, has to be signed off at leadership level. Otherwise, they can't travel because it's very crazy out there, very complex, and we have to be able to account for all our travellers.
So when we spoke beforehand, you mentioned that you'd become more risk averse as an organisation. That's reflected in your travel program. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is every single travel booking has to be treated as a project. We are very, very aware that we have to account for individuals, and being risk averse just means that we're taking on board what's happening outside of our organisation and making very sound decisions about our travellers, but at the same time listening to them and understanding what that means for them. So we're not saying that we don't want people to travel. What we're saying is that we're very, very mindful about who's travelling. We're very much aligning to what's happening outside and the countries that they're visiting, and we're keeping people informed. So being risk averse is just monitoring and keeping on top of what's happening within Fidelity when it comes to travel.
You're aware of our permissible travel framework. It sounds like you're sort of some way between the sort of permissible approach where you're keeping a tight rein on who can travel where for what reason and all the processes that need to happen. In fact, I think you devised like a really defined 10-step process. But you've also, I think I'm right in saying you've also got that bit which is before you press the button, think about the real value that this trip brings to the business. Is that fair?
Absolutely. So we have created a 10 steps to travel plan, and it's very much part of our Ready Safe Travel. And for that, what we're saying is we want people to travel with purpose. So the 10 steps to travel is very much giving them guidance and food for thought. Even before they press that button to make the booking, we're saying, think about it. What does that mean to you? How is that going to impact you as an individual? So your work-life balance, your well-being, both physically and mentally. How's it going to impact your family if you get stuck? How are you going to feel if you go to a country and it's moving from one colour to the next and you're having to stay longer? So we're really making people think about the decisions they make before they press that button. And even in terms of talking to their clients and saying, do you actually want to have a face-to-face meeting with us? Do we need to do that? The last year, what's shown us is that virtual meetings work, and it has had very, very little, if any, impact on our overall business. So it's been demonstrated that you can have virtual meetings. However, as things start easing and changing, we do recognize that people will want to travel and will travel. But having said that, we feel those 10 steps makes them really think about the initial pre-booking. Once they've made that booking, so the complexity of that booking and what's going to be required, what they need to take, what the forms they need to complete, do they need to have vaccines, do they need to have tests, all that, and also whilst traveling, consideration in terms of, where am I going? What are the rules and regulations of that country? Are things changing whilst I'm there? What are the protocols in terms of being inclusive, diversity and inclusion? Being a thoughtful traveler. Again, what are the rules? What applies? What's the attitudes? What's the culture? So that's what our 10 steps is all about, taking them right through the journey. Every booking we make, as I said, is a project for us. And it's very much about personalization, that individual from start to finish, giving them the information they need, supporting them through their journey. And then when they return, gathering the data that they bring us so that we can use that intelligence to share with future travelers.
Well, what I like is that it's become a very complex landscape. But I think it's fair to say that at every step of the way, you've become really good, Carol, at distilling it down to a really simple process. Of course, I understand there's complexity behind that process, but in terms of the traveller understanding how they need to think differently, that sounds like a really simple and effective way to get them to start thinking differently. In our purposeful travel model, we sort of talk about 4 steps. Step 1 is considering the landscape and how things have changed in order to think about your travel program differently. Second one, challenge the thinking of yourself and your peers. Step 3 is assessing what travel types bring value to the organization. And step 4 is discussing that plan with senior management. I'm going to ask you where you are on those steps. I suspect that the answer might not be a simple step 1 or 3, but maybe you can just give us an insight.
I think we cross over everything in terms of we're very much aware of the landscape, and the way we've chosen to do that is to keep ourselves informed. And what I mean by that is using the information and the intelligence that's been provided by companies like yourself, some of the associations out there, being on panels, networking widely, and really understanding what's happening out there and the information that we should be sharing with our travellers. And in so doing, we've been providing monthly newsletters where we're drip feeding that information. And we feel by marketing and communicating, that allows our travellers to really understand what is happening in externally and how complex travel is. And it's not just as easy as just booking a ticket, getting a seat and off you go. So that's part 1 in terms of the landscape, recognizing what's going out there and what we should do with that. The other thing is, before the pandemic, or when the pandemic started, travel and Fidelity, we were the heroes. Everyone wanted to know, what should we do? What should the policy look like? What should we be telling our travelers? What are going to be the rules of the game going forward? And we were able to do that. And in so doing, we put together no travel unless it was business critical or global mobility. So relocating can be done without board level approval. So that was the other step in terms of, taking it forward. What should we do? But having become the hero, once the travel had stopped, we suddenly disappeared. And it was, oh, well, travel's here. And I actually got to the point where I was beginning to feel, will I even have a job, at the end of this? Because they've got a global travel manager. There's no travel happening. So exactly what is she doing? Well, to be fair, we've been very, very busy. And as I said in the beginning, we used the opportunity to look at our program and say, how could we do things better? We went out to market. We've reduced the number of TMCs we currently use. There was a lot of consolidation, looking at our policies, looking at our processes, looking at our technology, and making improvements so that we are strong. We have a good, robust infrastructure in place to support our travelers when they start traveling again. But that said, we did all that, but we were the, at the bottom of the pile in terms of recognition and understanding. So I felt it was really important that I get in front of the board. So that's what I did. I put together a presentation that basically said, this is who we are as a team, and that we are ready, and that we are ready to support you with the things that we've put in place. However, what do you want? And also on top of that, in terms of being ready, these are our thoughts in terms of what we should be considering based on what we believe is important to you. And the important things to us for Fidelity was traveller wellbeing and work-life balance, embracing the technology, supporting our sustainability initiatives, and using the technology and personalization, which is what I talked about, and also finally cost. And believe it or not, we did a survey, and cost came right at the bottom of the pile. What was at the top of the pile was traveller wellbeing, sustainability, technology, and then cost. So they are the 4 key things of importance. And armed with that, putting the 10 steps together was a way of addressing that. And also, having put the 10 steps together, giving our travellers and our leaders some guidance and guidelines on how we could support those 4 key pillars. At the same time, making sure that people feel we can travel, we're really comfortable, we know what we're doing, and also giving the leaders guidance to say, okay, if we're going to follow a sustainability initiative and significantly look to reduce our carbon emissions, what does that look like? For me, what that means is travel with purpose, absolutely. Ask lots of questions around why are we doing this? So what's the return on investment? What is the return on value for that trip? What are we going to get out of that individual making that trip, given the complexities that surround making that booking? And having asked those questions, then say, what does that look like? Because although cost was at the bottom of the pile, what does that look like in reality in terms of a cost? And how can we manage our demand? And the guidelines that we've put together helps them to make that decision. So the target area that we honed in on was non-essential travel, which is about 69% of our back office travel admin. Most of that is long haul as well. And we said, this is an area that we can target in terms of helping us to reduce our travel. And the things that we're saying to them is, if you are a manager and you have staff responsibilities and significant staff responsibilities, we would of course expect you to travel, but don't go 4 or 5 times a year. Maybe go twice, stay longer. If you have a project or training that cannot be done locally, again, do the travel, but then make sure that you're balancing it out and doing it because it needs to be done. It cannot be done virtually. Go spend the time, come back. For our front office staff, we're saying, again, stay longer, work-life balance, think about your family. Is it something that you can do? But instead of going, London, China, London, Hong Kong, London, Singapore, do more circle fares. Again, spread it out, do less trips. Again, helping with our sustainability initiative, and by default, also supporting and managing demand and keeping our costs down.
So we'll get a little bit into the impact of what that means when it comes to your travel types and demand in a second. But I appreciate the long haul perspectives at that point. I think that there's 2 things that you've said that I've noted down, which I think travel managers watching this will find really interesting. The first one is your statement saying, will I ever have a job in the future as travel has disappeared? And if I'm advocating for a reduction in travel, or certainly to travel, you said describe it as travel with purpose, does that mean I've got less of a role in the future? I think there's probably a lot of travel managers out there feeling exactly the same. What I love is that you've taken the bull by the horns, taken the initiative, and you've gone to the board. And that's the second thing I picked up, is you didn't go to the board with a defined 100% solution. You went with, this is the outline of what we're proposing. But before we go any further, I want to check whether this is fully aligned with where your heads are at in running this business. And that's where they really emphasize the care piece and the sustainability piece. Then you brought that back into the program. So I kind of wanted to amplify those bits, because I think not going to the board without a fully complete and rounded plan is okay, because you're asking them the question, you're seeking their input, and therefore you'll get the buy-in. I also picked up 69% of non-essential travel. That's quite a big figure, isn't it? And so let's get, one of the steps is assessing what travel types will bring the most value. In the briefing call for this, you and I talked about internal versus external, because I sort of poo-poo internal versus external, but you're still keeping that definition, and you actually challenged me with some of your thinking around internal and external, and actually challenging some of your own internal travel needs. Can you just talk to that a second?
Yeah, so the reason why we define it is I'm a firm believer that we need to make things clear to our travellers. You know, a lot of the time the senior leaders say to me, Carol, if you want me to support you, you have to give us clarity so that when people come to us, we're very clear about what you're saying and we can use the guidelines to make those informed decisions. So that's one of the reasons why we define it. And although, you know, we accept that internal travel for us means that you are going to one of our offices, and a lot of our people get confused when they talk about stakeholders and clients. And when our internal people talk about stakeholders and clients, they actually mean us. They mean, you know, the other people that they're going to visit within the offices, so the senior leaders in Hong Kong, Singapore, etc. But what we mean is our own peers, people that we work for. So that's how we define it. When we talk about external travel, it's anyone that is outside of our company, that is a client, that we're going to their building, their offices, and that's how we define it. The other thing is we also define it by saying if it's external and it's client, it's revenue earning, revenue generating. So they're going to be bringing money in to the company by going on that trip, etc., a big deal or whatever. So that's how we define the differences. However, the reason why we believe that we can target the internal travel and class that as non-essential travel is because even though we recognize that there are some people that will need to travel, they will not need to travel as much in terms of the impact it will have overall to the company by them not visiting that individual. So when we look at it, for them, it's about socializing, networking, and developing and growing their teams, working and having some sort of relationship with the key stakeholders. But we say limit what you do. We're not stopping them, but we say limit what you do and think about it before you do it under the umbrella of supporting our sustainability initiative, work-life balance and traveller well-being, the complexities of travelling today, and also overall costs, so managing our demand. The other thing to point out is that with travel, we've made it quite clear that we will give you the guidelines and we will give you the opportunity to make the decisions in terms of what you deem as a business area to be essential and non-essential travel. By the time it comes to us, we would have assumed that you've made that decision and then we just make the booking. The only policing we will do is if that booking is out of policy. And out of policy for us is they're using a provider that they shouldn't be, they're going over the hotel cap rate, et cetera, they're going out of policy. But by the time they come to us, they should have read the guidelines, they should have followed the 10 steps, and they've decided, I'm going to make that booking. Even though I've read all that, it is important that I go on that trip. And we will then just make the booking.
How long have you had this process in place, Carol? I'm just wondering if you're, because what you're saying there is the individual business lines will make that decision. I think that's a really interesting distinction, that your job isn't to police this new purposeful approach.
Exactly.
Have you had any feedback that it's ridiculous, we need to be out there in front of everyone, we need to see our colleagues, or is it just been widely accepted because the leadership's objectives align directly with what you're trying to achieve here?
I think the reason why it was important for me to go to the leaders is if I was to put that out there outside of them, it would not fly.
Yeah.
They need to know that this decision has come from the top, and that's why it was so important that I invited myself to the board meeting to get their buy-in. Okay. And the very first slide told them, why am I here? And I had 5 key points. I am here because of but. And the following slides gave them the detail, to the extent that I'd written it in a way that they didn't. I even put a picture of myself so they knew exactly who was going to be on Zoom, as if they'd forget me, but I did that. And as a consequence of that, the opening statement from our CEO is, we will take this as read and we will concentrate on the first slide, just answering Carol's questions. So it gave me an opportunity to get my answers very, very quickly, because I was very clear about where we were today, what we'd already put in place and what I wanted from them. This is what I want from you. And as a result of that, I walked away with a better policy than I actually wanted. I didn't realize how much our board did care in terms of our We Care policy. So I got more than I actually put forward. And secondly, they bought into it. And as a result of that, the communication that's gone out, everyone has bought into it because it's come from senior leader.
Yeah. It's a test case example of how to communicate with your board. So thank you for sharing that with us. I suspect you may get a lot of people contacting you via saying, can I have a copy of the slides? But no, I'll leave you to deal with that one. Let's move on to the travel types. You've already mentioned encouraging people to use those long haul trips to extend the time, get more purpose out of those trips. Are there any other changes to the types of travel, either for short haul travel or maybe changes in demand for the type of accommodation people are using?
Yeah. So on short haul, we're saying forget about the one dayers. We had a lot of people that just did one dayers. We'd say, why are you doing that? Do virtual meetings, use the technology. And again, as with everything else, travel with purpose, do you need to do that trip? But on the actual short haul, that was the one thing that jumped out. They were doing lots of one days. We're saying, forget that. Okay. With regards to staying longer, we've created an accommodations program that has both service departments and hotels. We've now mandated that if it's 5 days plus and that service apartments are available in the location that they're visiting, they use those apartments in line with staying longer. So, and we want, the reason we've said that is you'll get a much better home from home feel as well. So if you arrive at a country and you find that you have to work from home or something's happened where you need to stay longer, you've got a beautiful service department, you'll feel you're much more at home and you can work from home as opposed to being in a hotel room, feeling a lot more closeted and a lot more isolated. So that's why we've suggested that. So that's another big change for us. And, when we sent out our survey over a year ago, we actually talked about service departments and we only got a very small number of people that actually came back and said that they wanted to stay in a service department. They actually said they'd prefer to stay in a hotel. And so it went from 19% of people saying it to this new survey, 32% of people came back and said they'd stay in a service department, which is a big shift. And I think the reason why that happened is because we actually defined the difference between a service department and a hotel in the survey. And I'm not preaching and saying that one is better than the other, but in terms of wanting people to feel that more home from home, being able to cook for themselves, being able to make their own decisions around, looking after the apartment, who comes in, who goes out, etc. We felt that we should tell them that that's the kind of service that they could get with a service department versus a hotel, and what would you prefer? But having defined, we showed the pros and cons of both. But it was interesting that the amount of people that came back and said they'd be willing to stay in a service department had shifted quite a lot.
I think that there was a kind of component of that shift prior to the pandemic anyway, and I think partly that may have been driven by more service department type inventory coming onto the channels that are presented to manage travel programs. But what's interesting about what you said there is actually that this whole thing kind of fundamentally shifts the mix of your travel need from, maybe airline comes down, but a service department and accommodation that will actually grow. Because to your point, people might be taking one trip out of 5, but they're going to be staying for 10 days instead of 2 days. And so that shifts the balance.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So we're giving them the comfort, they're staying longer, we're managing our demand better. By default, it's supporting the sustainability, it's helping with traveller well-being and work-life balance, and also addressing our sustainability initiative.
Yeah, okay. What do you think, what are the implications here for your future role or for your travel program or for your supply chain? Any perspectives on kind of what this means for you guys in the future?
I think for me as a travel manager, I think it's important that, I continue to really understand our landscape, our world, and the way that we work with our suppliers. I think it's really incumbent on travel managers more than ever to build those relationships with our suppliers and have those partnerships and be honest, open and frank in terms of where we are, what we're trying to do and the changes that we want to make. I also think that we're in an absolutely fantastic place at the moment to make really big changes and address some of the things that weren't right before, make those changes today. We have that white sheet of paper, we have that greenfield site. So optimize on it, really work together and make those changes for the good of the industry and for everybody, and that the suppliers and the buyers need to be very much connected. None of this is a buyer association, this is a supply association. That needs to go away, and we need to link. What the pandemic has taught us all is that we need each other. And that's why we should utilize that time and have that joining together. With regards to my role, I did fear for my role in the beginning because, as I said, no travel. They have a global travel manager. And if I was a senior leader, I'd be asking the question, so what's the travel manager doing? We did use the time and make best use of it. And as a result of that, I feel that I'm ready to face whatever the world in travel has to throw at me. But I think more than ever now, you need your travel manager or travel expert. And the reason I say that is there's just too much going on. And if you don't have that one central point of call that can pull everything together and be the voice for travel for your organization, you're just going to fall over. You can't afford to have lots of bits and pieces of different people trying to give you information. And what I'm saying is how organizations decide to create or have that individual is down to them, but you definitely have to have a travel lead in all organizations to pull the complexities of travel together and bring reason to madness. And that's where we are today. Bring reason to madness. I love that final line. And I also love the positivity of what you talked about there. And actually, you talked earlier on about hero to zero. It sounds like a hero sandwich. It's hero to zero to hero. And as long as you keep reviewing the landscape, aligning with your C-suite objectives and creating a program that's going to resonate with the organization, you're saying you've got a bright future. And I couldn't think of a nicer way to end the interview. So thank you so much, Carol, for giving us the benefit of your insights and for sparing the time with us today. Thank you, Paul. And I hope it resonates with all who have listened to this video. Thank you. So thanks for joining us for this In Conversation With series with Carol Fergus from Fidelity International. You can access the Purposeful Travel Model at festive-road.com. And if you want further updates to videos that we release, just click the subscribe button below and watch out for future episodes. Thanks for joining us.